Shalom, this is Yitzchak Reuven from the Temple Institute. I have a special guest with me today, Abba Horowitz, who I'm sure you all remember from a number of teachings that he gave earlier in the year. He's back with us today. Today is what's today? It's the 4th of Av?
Well, Tisha B'Av is on
Tisha
Sunday.
B'Av is on Sunday. Shabbat was the first, Sunday was the second. So today's the 4th of Av. We're in the 9 days, the 9 final days of the 3 weeks, which is actually 22 days of mourning, the Bein HaMetzarim, between the straits, we call it. And I want to say a story to introduce my life with the 3 weeks in the 9th of Av. And then, Abba, I'm going to ask you to say a few words. You introduce your story. I first came to Israel in 1981. Fresh out of university and, a newbie in Judaism. I've been a couple of years getting into it and learning about it. Was raised without religion, and so it was all very new to me. But as soon as I came to Israel, I was here. I knew I was here. And I remember the first Tisha B'Av, going to the Kotel, the Western Wall, in the evening. I'm sure everybody has similar stories, and it was packed with every kind of Jew under the sun, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, from the Americas. Every type of Jew was there, packed and praying and saying kinot, which are the, what are kinot? How would you, there is a word for it.
Words of mourning, words of feeling, of
that we chant.
Sad feelings.
Yeah, there's actually an English word, I can't think of it right now. And I stayed the entire night, right, till daybreak, and then prayed in the morning, which is what a lot of people do. And it was very impressive. I mean, there were just so many people, and it lasted all night long and all through the day. And I guess late morning, I finally went back to wherever I was living. And I guess the next year I went again. And when I went the second time, it was like, we're doing this again? The same thing? Like, it didn't really make sense to me. Like, we did that last year. Okay, it was the first time I had been involved in anything like that. It was amazingly impressive. The entire Jewish world, seems to be there, unified, wanting, praying, and mourning the loss of the Mikdash, which I did realize was not the wall that we were standing in front of, but had been above that wall. I mean, that much I knew. And not everybody knows that or sees it that way.
Or pays attention.
Right. But so from that point on, I realized we got to be moving forward. Like, I know that we've been doing that same thing for 2,000 years, but I got it. We're in Israel. We have sovereignty. We did the impossible. We're fulfilling prophecies. So why are we mourning? It's not appropriate when we can be changing the situation. Again, I've talked about this. Talked with Rabbi Richmond in the past years. You mourn for a person. You're in avelut for a person, a beloved one who has passed on. You're going through a process of letting go because you can't change that reality. It's finished. It's over. But in terms of the Mikdash, we can change it. We shouldn't be mourning. Now, this might have upset a lot of people who say, this is what we do. We mourn. Like, this is what the 3 weeks are all about. It's our tradition. Okay, I'm upsetting, the apple cart, we say. It's like, I think the tradition needs to change. So before, I'm going to let Abba speak right now, but right before that, I'm going to say our approach in this broadcast, and it's kind of an open, a free-form broadcast. We're just going to speak what's in our hearts, what's on our minds. And it's going to be upbeat. And if people think it shouldn't be upbeat, it should be downbeat, that's the word, I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry, but I apologize. I don't mean to offend anyone, but we're talking about the Mikdash, we're talking about rebuilding, we're talking about preparation, we're talking about the future. And so we're upbeat about it. Okay, that's what, to me, the 3 weeks. To me, it's 12 months of the year. I mean, I work for the Temple Institute. This is my job description. We talk, we study, we prepare, we try to get people interested and excited about the Mikdash. That's what we do. But these 3 weeks, especially when I have a lot more people's attention, especially among the Jewish communities around the world, it's really important, I think, to convey this message that we need to be focused and facing toward the future. Abba, maybe you'll give your, like I did, a little history of your
Absolutely.
changing perspective on the 3 weeks.
Absolutely. First of all, I think Yitzchak's being modest. Yitzchak has done an incredible job for the Temple Institute. I've witnessed it myself over the last year and a half, especially during Corona, which made it more challenging. But yeah, I want to move on to this. And if I could just add one thing here is, I think we all learn about the Mikdash in school. Certainly if you grew up going to, day school, yeshiva, whatever it may be, we all learn about the Mikdash. But I think the biggest problem is we're not awake. And we have to wake up. And we have to actually see and be aware what's being written in the scriptures, what God's words are being written. What is he telling us? And I can actually tell you about my own personal experience, and it actually happened in Israel. I always had a problem with Tisha B'Av, it just didn't resonate with me. I grew up in Toronto, and you go to your synagogue, you go to your shul, and it's almost like painful. It was almost painful to have to go. You didn't really connect to the Mikdash. You wanted to know what shows on TV can we watch on the day? Are there any Holocaust shows that we can watch? Because you felt that was okay to watch on Tisha B'Av because you're feeling bad. It brings these feelings of, But also we're supposed to mourn the what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. It's all part of this whole Tisha B'Av experience. I believe also World War I started on Tisha B'Av, if I'm correct.
Something like that, yeah.
And anyway, so I grew up with this feeling of almost disconnected, and I think most people like me, and I grew up religious, but I think most people were just very disconnected and almost wanted to get over the Tisha B'Av, okay? When I was in Israel, though, I'd been in Israel for quite a few years already, 5 years or so, and I can actually tell you the first time I saw the Kotel Hamaravi, the Western Wall, which is outside the Temple Mount, as many of you know, I was 17 and a half. And I remember remarking to my brother when he brought me there. My brother was in Israel at the time, and he took me to the Kotel. And I said to him, that's it? This is what all the pictures and all the feelings toward the Kotel were? Now, I think what you can tell here is that I didn't even think about what was on the other side of the Kotel. I didn't even know. I had no idea. I didn't know any facts. I didn't know any details. And I had grown up in yeshiva. And so that's even more pathetic. But what happened was, Gush Katif happened in the summer of 2005. And it was very troubling for me. I was very down about what happened. I was involved. I had gotten arrested also in Gush Katif.
Just to interrupt Gush Katif, we're talking about the expulsion of the Jews in Gush Katif, which happened on the 9th of Av.
It was on the 10th. Initially, it was meant to happen on the 9th.
But our very Zionistic government decided we can't do it on the 9th. That's too too much of an indictment against what we're doing. So we did it on the 10th, which actually, we all know that the Mikdash was destroyed on the 9th, but the 10th it was still in flames.
Yafeh, exactly. That's a very good point. So it was a very tough time for me because I was living here in Israel. I loved living in Israel. I loved the people of Israel. But I had a problem here. I mean, I really felt this was a crime against humanity. I felt people's lives were destroyed for no reason, really. And it was very troubling. And I was sort of searching, what's my purpose here in Israel? What are we doing here? What's the real point? Why does Hashem want us in Eretz Yisrael? Why do I need to be in the Middle East next to, surrounded by enemies that want to attack us at any moment? Why do I need to be here? I had a very nice house, in America, and I grew up in Canada. Why do I need to be here? And God brought me the answer. It was almost God took care of me here. He knew I was searching, and he introduced me to Rabbi Ariel. And Rabbi Yisrael, on Pesach, there was an article written about the Rav of the Temple Institute, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, and it was all about bringing offerings for the Korban Pesach. And I read this article many times over, actually, over Pesach, and I realized I had to meet this Rav. And I didn't know why. I just felt like I didn't know anything about Korbanot offerings, didn't know anything about the Mikdash, and I saw myself as someone somewhat learned, and I needed to meet this person, and I did. He came to my offices, actually, and Har Chotzvim, which is in Jerusalem. It's like a tech center in Jerusalem. I had offices in Har Chotzvim. And the Rav came with another individual. And interesting enough, the Rav made me coffee. It's a whole story there on its own. He had this, almost this humility, this beautiful humility about him that, he didn't have any of like this, feel that he was unapproachable. He was a very approachable guy. And we started to talk, and he showed me projects that the Mechon was doing. And then he threw actually a question out to me, which is a great question. He said, were there any mezuzahs in the Beit HaMikdash? And I, of course, did not know the answer to that. Okay, now I do, because it's a whole Gemara in Yuma, in the Talmud Yuma. It discusses it, whether it was on the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, or it was also on Shar Niknor. It's a whole discussion there about the mezuzah, but that's not important right now. What it did was it brought me into the world of the Mikdash. And I started to understand how little I knew, but how much I wanted to know. Yeah. And how much, and like many people go into this world, they become obsessed. And that's what happened to me. And everything in my life, I started to connect to the temple. Yeah. Suddenly I saw verses in the Bible, in the Chumash, differently.
Your tefillah, your prayers in the morning.
100%.
So much connected to the mikdash, to the offerings.
Crazy.
And
Musaf every Shabbat.
Yeah.
Right. What we say in Musaf, we talk about the korban, the two kvasim that we bring as a korban musaf. Right. And the whole davening, the whole prayer of the musaf prayer on Shabbat is all about the mikdash, and how we ignore it. Why? And I think it's very simple, because they're not awake. You have to be awake to the mikdash. You have to be aware of it. You have to sort of internalize it.
Yeah,
the mikdash.
You have to be awake. We every year, the international department, our department here, puts out a video for the 9 days of Av. And this year, if you haven't seen it, please go to see it. You can see it on the Temple Institute Facebook page or our YouTube channel, also our Instagram page, et cetera, et cetera. And the storyline is very simple. We show a guy having his morning coffee, and he's looking at his tablet news, and it happens to be all good news, like wonderful news, like world peace, and religious leaders, get together to promote, unity and whatever. And then his alarm goes off. And his alarm goes off, and his little son hears it, runs in and says, "Abba, can I help you get ready for work?" And he says, "Sure, son." And then you see him, and he's sort of in the shadows, so because for the dramatic effect. But the boy is helping his father put on his beged kuhuna, his priestly garment. And then we see this Kohen, temple priest, with his garment on and his very heroic, sort of a superhero pose. And then he's sort of like, he's happy and proud to be doing what he's doing. And then we hear a horn honking from outside, and he goes, "Oh, that's my ride." Now, in reality, when the Kohanim would be working, they would do a reserve duty really in the temple, and they would, I think, 2 weeks at a time, I believe, and they would sleep and get dressed on the Temple Mount in the Beit HaMoked, the chamber of the hearth. That's right. But for the illustrative purpose of this video, he's at home. So we want to show exactly what you said, waking up. The alarm goes off and then the horn honks, like wake up, and the final line, the call to action is time to get to work. And it wasn't obviously meant simply for that Kohen in the video, but for all of us. It's time to get to work. We have to wake up. There's a lot to do. Again, we're here in Israel, and what are we doing here? What's it all about? We're here, God's presence is here, but are we really making the connection? And I believe the real connection, the ultimate connection is the temple. And
I would definitely agree with that. I think, as we one time talked about this, Yitzchak, Jews have been in Galut for 2,000 years. They've been in exile for 2,000 years. and you can get the Jew out of the galut, but it's hard to get the galut out of the Jew.
Yeah.
And I think this really, I mean, we say that about a lot of things, but I think it's really true here is that a lot of people, in fact, even their dress is very galuti. The minhagim, many of the things, the things we do are customs that we do are galuti. I think the fact that we have 3 weeks, the Ashkenazim, now's a good time to be a Sephardi, by the way, because according to some Sephardim, if you look in the Tur Shulchan Aruch and you look, in the even in the Talmud and Tanit, you'll notice that essentially it's really only Shavua Shechalba. The week of Tisha B'Av is really when all this mourning takes place.
Which is between the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av, which in this year
there is no Shavua Shechalba. So if you're a Sephardi that holds only Shavua Shechalba, I'm very jealous of you. They could be getting a haircut, they can be shaving their beards, and they can be eating meat and drinking wine because there's no prohibition. However, the Ashkenazim, for some reason, decided that it wasn't enough Shavua Shechalbo, it wasn't enough 9 days, let's extend it to 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand it because in Galut, the history that we had was very troubled history. There are a lot of bad things always happening.
And we, barring a miracle, there's nothing you can do about it in Galut except mourn and pray. But ever since we've had, established ourselves here in Israel, and certainly ever since 1967 when the Temple Mount was in our hands, that just doesn't cut it anymore.
It doesn't make any more sense. It doesn't make sense. But again, I think for 2,000 years we've been going a certain way. We're on a certain path.
It's hard to do the switch.
It's
hard to wake up.
Yeah.
Now, there are many, school groups, and not just school groups, but groups of Jews who come to the Temple Institute to our exhibition during the 3 weeks, and there they learn about the temple. There it's not mourning, but it's real learning.
Yeah.
And learning about the past and the present and the future. That's the program. There are people who are like you and I who we're on board totally.
and we can't understand why other people aren't on board.
But even just to learn to open up a book and learn about the Mikdash, about the Holy Temple, as opposed to simply mourning, simply not having wine and not having meat. Open up a book, read about it, look at some of the pictures. I mean, again, when I first came to Israel in '81, it was, I don't think the Temple Institute wasn't established until '87. So this was 6 years before the Temple Institute. And I happened to be interested in the temple, believe it or not, because from my approach,
one of the few out there,
where I was coming from, basically a self-taught balei tshuva, returner to the faith, and I wasn't really returning, I was introducing myself for the first time.
I think it's a misnomer, this idea of bal tshuva. You have to know that it was asur, that it was prohibited, and then you say, I don't want to do the sin anymore. That's a bal tshuva, right.
So I was a newbie.
Yeah,
we'll call it that, a newbie.
Yeah.
And, reading, so the one thing I knew that I didn't always know growing up, but I discovered it, was that the Torah, the 5 books, were Jewish. And so I'm reading that, and I'm reading about the tabernacle and the menorah and the showbread table, and it's like, this is fascinating. So I had this interest from the start. And at the time, there were no pictures. There was no paintings of the Temple Institute.
Yeah, very
there
scarce.
Were, I remember finding a mimeograph. Remember that word, mimeograph?
Sure.
Look it up, kids. It doesn't exist anymore. A mimeograph pamphlet that had some drawings of some of the vessels, and I was like blown away. But today it's go online, go to the Temple Institute website. You can learn a ton of stuff, and not just the Temple Institute website. And the Temple Institute paintings, which depict life in the temple, are all over the place now. I mean, while we have no, it's the internet. You have no real control over who, So you see a picture of the temple, there's a good chance it's going to be one of our paintings, and kol hakavod, look at it, study it, get interested, get involved, think about it. Think about, a lot of people, when I talk about these things, is people have questions. One of the questions always is, what about the korbanot? What about the offerings? We're not going to really be offering animals, are we? And, People have a problem with that because it sounds ugly and it sounds primitive and it sounds barbarian and it sounds, here's a word I love, idolatrous. Why do I say I love it? Because if the Torah says we should do it, that by definition, it's not idolatry. It's what the Torah is telling us to do. If, you see a similarity between temple offerings and offerings that other peoples in the past did, okay, there's a similarity there. They're all offering animals, not the same animals, not with the same criteria, not for the same purpose or to the same God. But I get that you see a similarity, but...
one can make the same claim, though, for a lot of things. Wine is used in idolatrous situations, but we drink wine, and wine's a very important part of our... Even today, without the Mikdash, without the temple, it's still a very important part for making Kiddush. So calling it all those things, we have to go back, I think, to first principles. What are we meant to believe here? If we believe in God, we know that God is perfect. We know that He's an omnipotent being out there. And what He tells us to do, He would know better than us Western man who has developed, different kinds of approaches to life. But at the end of the day, God, bottom line is, He's the life that we need to follow. He created us. If you don't believe that, I agree with you, then korbanot offerings are going to be weird. But if you believe in God and you believe that this is the 5 books of Moses that He gave to us, and we have to believe that, and by the way, it's one of the 13 principles of faith, okay, to believe that the 5 books were given to Moshe, okay? If that's the case, I don't think this is a point for thinking. I think it's education, but not for us to debate, whether or not we should be bringing korbanot.